Every now and then an entity comes around in football that no matter how hard you try and hate, you just have to respect it. Through sheer dominance and determination alone, this person or club forces you to have to acknowledge what it is achieving and how it's going about it. No more was this true than when Jose Mourinho originally arrived in England to manage Chelsea. At this point, unless you're literally a child, we're all familiar with the magnificent resume that Jose Mourinho has in world football. The guy's been all over the world as a manager and has brought success to pretty much every club that he has come across, of course except Spurs. He's a proper legend of football, but I just can't help but feel like his original stint with Chelsea often goes overlooked when looking at his resume as a whole. His original run with Chelsea is literally the reason why he's called the special one to begin with. He gave himself the nickname and then proceeded to back up his talk. His aura just pretty much shot straight through the roof when he got to Chelsea. He came in hot, talking a lot of smack and rubbing people the wrong way, but no one could do anything about it because he had Chelsea Football Club playing out of their skin. With so much time passing by and football having seen so many other good managers come and go since, I feel like it's easy for us to forget firstly how dominant this period was for Chelsea, and secondly how great Mourinho was as a manager during this time. It's a shame that this 3-year period of the club goes under the radar because, no pun intended, it truly was special. But that's what we're here for today, to shine some light on some greatness. And real quick boys, if you're new to the channel, enjoying the video, enjoying the content, don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. We are dropping weekly football videos as well, so make sure you hit that notification bell so you don't miss an upload. And if you're not new to the channel boys, welcome back. Glad to have you around for another video. Let me know in the comments down below what you think about Mourinho's original tenure with Chelsea. But with that being said boys, let's get into this absolute greatness that was on display from Mourinho and Chelsea back in the day. So of course something had to happen within Chelsea Football Club for them to actually be looking for a new manager, which allowed Mourinho to come in. The club was coming off a very unsuccessful period in the late 90s and the early 2000s. From 1996 to 1999, Chelsea would fail to win the Premier League and only managed to get their hands on an FA Cup and a Football League Cup. In a hunt to capture their first ever Premier League title, the club would bring in Claudio Ranieri in 2000, but even this was still not good enough. The closest Chelsea would get under Ranieri would be the 03-04 season, which changed a lot of things. With the club on the brink of a financial crisis, it would be sold to the now infamous Russian oligarch Roman Abramovich, who came in swinging in the transfer market. He would bring in Crespo for 29 million euros, Damien Duff for 24 million euros, Adrian Mutu for 22.7, Sebastian Meron for 21.8, Claudio Makalele for 20 million, Glenn Johnson for 8 million, and Joe Cole for 9.9 million euros, amongst many others, with the intent of finally bringing Chelsea to the promised land. Well, after Ranieri failed for the 4th time as Arsenal would go undefeated the entire season, he would see the end of the road, with Abramovich being fond of bringing in a Portuguese manager that was making some noise with Porto. Jose Mourinho in his time with the Portuguese club had a lot of people interested in his services. After all, he did lead Porto to 2 back-to-back league titles and most notably to victory in the Champions League. It was the 03-04 season where Mourinho's Porto would knock out Manchester United, Lyon, and Deportivo La Coruña en route to winning the big one. It was very clear that Mourinho was a fearless manager that tactically could go toe-to-toe with the best of them. For this reason, Mourinho was a man that Abramovich just knew would take Chelsea to that promised land. So on June 2nd, 2004, Jose Mourinho would make the move to London and was announced as the manager of Chelsea. In his very first press conference for the club, you could see that he was not afraid on taking on this bigger role, and this is where he famously referred to himself as the special one. And before the season got started, Abramovich would do what he did best and backed Mourinho tremendously in the transfer window. This window being one that really set Chelsea up for quite some time to be a successful club. Petr Cech would join for 13 million euros, Thiago Mendes for 15 million euros, Arjen Robben for 18 million euros, Ricardo Carvalho for 30 million euros, and Didier Drogba for 38.5 million euros. All these signings, alongside the elite talent that Chelsea already had at the club, realistically set up Mourinho to play his more defensive system at a high level. So with all this talk, all this money being spent on the team, and the need for Chelsea to finally get a hold of the Premier League title, the pressure was on. And in this case, pressure really made diamonds, because what we went on to see from this Mourinho-led Chelsea was absolutely historical. His first Premier League test would be against Manchester United. Having beaten United in his Champions League run with Porto and getting into a spat with Sir Alex Ferguson, all eyes were on this match. And in a result that would set the tone for the Mourinho era, new signing Drogba would find Gudjonsen in behind to make it 1-0, and from there Chelsea would see out the game by restricting United from having any clear chances. From here, Chelsea would continue to go on a tear, and in the next 7 matches went undefeated with 5 wins and 2 draws, only conceding 1 goal during this time. It wouldn't be until match day 9 where Chelsea lost to 13th place Man City. Chelsea were perhaps too confident in this match and would see a rare defensive error which allowed Anelka to win a penalty that he would put away, enough to get past Mourinho on the day. And aside from the Premier League, Mourinho would get the Champions League campaign started off on a pretty good note, as they would win the first 2 matches with an aggregate score of 6-1, which continued to show the world how hard this Chelsea team would be to break down. Back in the Prem, Drogba, Lamela, Lampard, and Johnson started to explode when it came to goal scoring, and the team began to win games by bigger margins. The creativity of guys like Damien Diouf, Arjen Robben, and again Lampard was also massive in unlocking this forward threat. Chelsea maintained these higher margins by also being difficult to break down due to the backline of William Gallas, John Terry, Ricardo Carvalho, and Paulo Ferreira. By the end of the summer, Chelsea were sitting at the top of the table in the Premier League and had progressed into the round of 16 in the Champions League by topping their group in the process. And just 2 months later, they would win their first trophy in the EFL Cup. Mourinho had gotten past Newcastle, Fulham, and Manchester United en route to the final, all only conceding 2 goals in 5 games. In the final, Liverpool took the lead, but a Gerrard own goal would see them go to extra time. Here, 2 extra time goals would be enough to see Chelsea come out on top despite a consolation goal from Liverpool. Mourinho after the match would shush the Liverpool crowd, making an enemy out of them for life. A treble was no longer possible since they had gotten bounced out of the FA Cup by Newcastle a few weeks ago, but they would have their eyes set on the Premier League and the Champions League. In the Champions League, first they had Barcelona in the round of 16. First leg did see Chelsea draw first blood, but a Drogba red card in the second half would give Barcelona the momentum they needed to get 2 unanswered goals and take a 2-1 lead back to London. At home, Chelsea would come out hot as they scored 3 in the first half, with Barca drawing blood twice until Terry found the go-ahead goal in the second half. Against Bayern Munich in the quarterfinals, Chelsea would get the job done, but lived life much more on the danger side as 2 high-scoring matches saw Chelsea come out as the 6-5 winners on aggregate. Mourinho, despite being banned, needed to get words off to his players and snuck in and out of the dressing room in a laundry bin. The guy was a maniac who was committed to winning, and this was clear in just the first season. Unfortunately, the semi-finals would be the end of the road for Chelsea, and against Liverpool, they were unable to score across 2 legs and lost 1-0 on aggregate to the eventual champions. A tough loss, but by this point of the season, guess what? Chelsea had already been crowned Premier League champions. From February onward, Chelsea continued to dominate in the league and saw out the season with just that 1 loss to Man City. In this time, they also only conceded 8 goals in the process, and when all was said and done, Mourinho in his first season led Chelsea to then Premier League high 95 points with just 15 goals conceded, which is still a record to this day. The special one managed to bring Chelsea their first Premier League title in such a dominant fashion with a cheeky EFL Cup on the side. And having finally brought Chelsea to that promised land, it was clear that Mourinho was the real deal. In that first season, he shut up all his haters, and bar the exit in the Champions League and the FA Cup, he didn't really leave too much room for criticism. But that Premier League win and the way they went about it did mean there was a lot of pressure for Mourinho to keep this success up and to maintain those standards. So to best get prepared for the 05-06 season, Chelsea would get busy in the transfer window. The club would get rid of Thiago Mendes and Scott Parker, and in their place Chelsea brought in Lassana Diarra for 4.5 million euros, Sean Wright-Phillips for 31.5 million euros, and Michael Essien for 38 million euros, with Abramovich once again showing his willingness to pay for the best talents. Mourinho and Chelsea did not skip a beat as they would continue their dominance from the season before, where last season they started off by going 8 matches undefeated. This season they were able to get the first 11 matches out of the way without a single loss in the league. More impressively, they won 10 games and only drew 1 in that run, while also not conceding a goal in the first 6 matches. One player who benefited greatly from the structure of the squad was Frank Lampard. He would become increasingly effective during his time with Mourinho, and in the 05-06 season, having Makelele, Diarra, and Essien as options in behind him in the midfield allowed him to get forward with a lot of ease. In that 11-game unbeaten run, he'd rack up 10 goals and 5 assists, proving to be an absolute menace for any opponent. Chelsea would stumble twice early in the season. First on match day 12 against United, where they would get their first loss in the league, and secondly in the 3rd round of the EFL Cup, where Charlton would beat them on penalties. Disappointing but relatively small hiccups on the road. Again this season, by the end of December, Chelsea would progress to the round of 16 of the Champions League, this time coming 2nd in their group, just a point off of Liverpool. And for Chelsea this season, their Champions League dream would be cut just a little bit shorter, as in the round of 16 they would match up against Barcelona. But this time around they were going up against Barcelona with Ronaldinho at his peak form. Chelsea would get a red card in the first leg, and despite a Thiago Motta own goal, Terry would get one himself, and Eto'o would get a second for Barca, which saw them again take a 2-1 lead back to London. But that second leg would prove to be a very cagey affair, and late in the match a wonder strike from Ronaldinho would see Barca take the lead, with a consolation goal from Lampard being too little too late. As the season carried forward, they continued to be elite in the Premier League, but slightly less dominant than before. This was evident when on match day 26, a 16th place Middlesbrough would get the better of Chelsea and beat them 3-0. In a reverse from last season, they would actually get pretty far in the FA Cup this time around, as they would make the semi-final. A relatively easy run through Huddersfield, Everton, Colchester, and Newcastle meant that only Liverpool stood in their way, and the perennial thorn in Mourinho's side would come out as as the 2-1 winners on the day, meaning that it was just the Premier League left for the club. But that wasn't a problem because Chelsea were in a pretty comfortable spot at this point of the season. And despite a handful of scary results such as a 1-0 loss to Fulham, a 0-0 draw with Birmingham, and a 1-0 loss to Blackburn, Chelsea on matchday 34 would actually beat United 3-0 thanks to goals from their back line, and this would win them the league. Like I said, Chelsea weren't as dominant as that first season with Mourinho, but they were still a very dominant team. Those prolonged periods of winning that they had early in the season and kind of throughout really helped them to kind of just maintain their place at the top. In the back-to-back winning season, Chelsea would end up with 91 points and conceding 7 more goals than the year before, despite the failures in the competition. Thanks to Mourinho and his system, which made Chelsea one of the most difficult teams to break down in the league, they went from 0 Premier League titles to now being back-to-back champions. So with 2 seasons under his belt of elite football at the highest level, what was next for Mourinho and Chelsea? Well, remember earlier how I said we're all pretty much aware of Mourinho's legendary status as a manager? Well, I'm pretty sure we're all also aware of the third season syndrome that follows around Mourinho, and more or less this kind of hit Chelsea towards the end of his third season. Going into the 06-07 campaign, there was already murmurs of Mourinho struggling to get along with the Chelsea board and Abramovich, which fueled conversations of a potential exit. Despite this, Mourinho stayed at the helm, saying that he'd only leave if sacked, and once again we saw some comings and goings in the transfer window. Damien Duff, Janssen, Robert Huth, Veron, Crespo, and Gallas would all end up leaving the club that summer, and Chelsea would pick up Michael Ballack on a free transfer, Solomon Kalou for €4 million, Ashley Cole for €7.4 million, John Obi Mikel for €20 million, and Andriy Shevchenko for €43.9 million. With this window, Chelsea was bringing in more stars with the hope that this would send a message that they intended to go for the 3rd title in a row. And when they smashed Chelsea on the opening game week from players who had been so important for Chelsea before in Drogba, Lampard, and Terry, that message was loud and clear. However, this season Chelsea would not go on that prolonged winning streak to start off the season, as just in match week 2 they would fail to get past Middlesbrough. Ultimately though, this would prove to just be kind of a small hiccup because after this game the defense really locked in and remembered how rigid they could be if they really wanted to. What also helped Chelsea get back on track was Drogba hitting a monstrous run of form. The guy literally became unstoppable. After that Middlesbrough game, Chelsea did manage to go on a 12-game unbeaten run across the Champions League and the Premier League, where Drogba would score 9 goals and assist 3. There was no need for panic stations yet. And come the end of December, Chelsea were 2nd place in the league for the first time in a long time, as they were trailing United by 6 points, but that gap felt manageable. They again found themselves topping their Champions League group to make the round of 16 and were comfortably making runs in the FA Cup and the EFL Cup. And also Drogba and Lampard both continued to improve as the season went on. There was a belief that potentially a quadruple could be coming their way. So let's go competition by competition and see how Chelsea managed this potential quadruple. In the EFL Cup, Chelsea had the benefit of a relatively easy run to the final, as they would get past Blackburn, Aston Villa, Newcastle, and Wickham on the way there. In the final, they did have to face off against one of Mourinho's main ops, Arsene Wenger. In the final, a brace from Didier Drogba would see Chelsea lift 1 trophy, with ideally 3 more to go. In the FA Cup, Chelsea's path would be a little bit more difficult, but they still got to the final. Having beat Forest, Norwich, Tottenham, and Blackburn on the way, now it was Manchester United left to beat. Well, surprise, Didier Drogba once again would be the difference, as his 1 goal would see Chelsea win the FA Cup. 2 down, 2 to go. In the Champions League, they would more or less look to get back to the heavily defensive style of play that had done them so good in the past. In the round of 16 against his former club Porto, Chelsea would win 3-2 over 2 legs, as 2 of the new arrivals in Shevchenko and Ballack came up with some important goals. The quarterfinals were eerily similar to the semifinals, as Chelsea would face off against Valencia in the first leg. A Drogba goal would help the club see out a 1-1 draw, and in the return leg, Shevchenko would again get on the score sheet to see Chelsea win 2-1 on the day and 3-2 on aggregate. But in the semi-final, we would see a repeat of the 04-05 season, as Chelsea would run into Liverpool. In the first leg, a goal from Joe Cole at Stamford Bridge would see Chelsea win the match 1-0, as they were able to hold on to the lead. In the second leg, Agger would fire Liverpool to level, and after a stalemate, the match went to penalties, where Chelsea crumbled and missed the chance to go to the final again. A massive disappointment, but this would be one up to just pretty much a week later, when Chelsea allowed their next biggest competition to slip through their hands. In the Premier League, Chelsea remained hot on United heels, but never actually jumped them to go into first. A small row of draws in the middle of the season and losing to Liverpool on matchday 24 meant that Chelsea was dropping points that they desperately needed. Come matchday 34, Chelsea would face United at Stamford Bridge, being 6 points off of them. They needed to win to even have remotely of a chance mathematically to win the league, but after a stalemate, the match would end 0-0, and thus United would win the league. What made the final few weeks of the Premier League feel even more disappointing for this Chelsea side was the fact that in their last 5 games, they drew all of them, meaning out of a possible 15 points, they only accumulated 5. You would think 2 trophies would be deemed a success, but after what Mourinho had accomplished, he was a victim of his own success. Just an FA Cup and just an EFL Cup was a failure, especially given the context of the amount of money spent, as well as how the Champions League and the Premier League played out. So with all of this happening in that final season, the tension between Mourinho and the board seemingly reached an all-time high. Mourinho would stay in the role to start the season, but Chelsea's spending habits kinda was an indicator of things to come. If you take a look, they didn't really bring in any notable transfers, and more than likely this was probably due to the fact that Mourinho's time realistically was running out and they didn't want to spend money just for a new manager to come in and request different players. And lo and behold, just 2 months into the season, after a goalless draw with Blackburn, Mourinho would leave Chelsea on quote-unquote mutual terms, putting an end to his time in England. Mourinho came and just showed everyone how it's done. He cooked everybody. He won 2 leagues back to back. He won the FA Cup. He won the EFL Cup. The only thing he really didn't win was the Champions League. Jose Mourinho literally came in and set a historical record of the most points achieved, the least goals conceded. Tactically, the guy was a menace and he was just cooking everybody. It's a shame that team never won the Champions League because really in the Premier League they were so elite, but they could just never get it done. I feel like it's sometimes one of the least talked about teams when looking back at Premier League history. It's always talking about the Invincibles, it's always talking about Manchester United's multiple treble winning teams, but I feel like that Chelsea team kind of ends up going under the radar. Guys like John Terry, Drogba, Lampard, Petr Cech, Ashley Cole, love him or hate him, all solidified themselves in history. All I know is we're probably never ever going to see another manager like Jose Mourinho, so we just need to enjoy him as a manager while he's still out there in the field.